Welcome to the Mormon to Medium podcast, where we'll talk about spirituality, the paranormal, religion, and my journey going from Mormon to medium. I'm Nanette and Brad. Thanks for listening. Now let's go have some fun.
Don't be afraid. Close your eyes. There's a moon overhead, but the sun will rise. Blood on our lips, such a poisonous bite. The sound of our hearts go bump, bump, bump in the night.
Hello and welcome. This is the Mormon to Medium podcast. I'm Brad and I'm here with
Nanette.
the medium.
The medium.
She's the medium part of this show.
Oh my gosh, that just sounds so funny to me.
Does it sound, well, why does that sound funny to you?
Because I never wanted to be a medium, but voila, here I am.
Do you know what? Sometimes shit happens and your destiny takes you where your destiny takes you.
It's true. But you know what? You are one too. So yeah, it's just very cool.
Don't try and lump me into your weirdness.
Yeah, whatever. You are.
Do you know what? Yeah, maybe a little bit once in a while things come through, but nothing like you. I don't have that fine tune ability like you have. I just let it go. If it happens, it happens.
Let it go.
Not quite like that, but
You just let it go. No, you know what? You just don't have to perform it. Do you know what I mean? You don't have a sitter in front of you all the time. Yours just flows through you really easily.
that's a good point. I can't imagine how stressful that must be sometimes to be like, all right, spirit, are you working today? Are you coming through or...
Believe me, I get in my head a lot. I'm like, you better show up because if you don't, this is going to really hurt. But they always show up. And shockingly enough, I'm still shocked about my latest readings. So I'm just still shocked because I have alive people that come through. If they have Alzheimer's, dementia, or on anesthetic, they will come through to me and I will describe them to a T, their life, their messages, because they're not mentally in their body.
Yeah.
Their spirit is still attached to their body, but they're not in their body. So they come to me and it's crazy. I had that for a sitter.
Well, and I remember the first time that happened to you, it freaked you out so bad you called your mentor and were like, hey, what is going on?
Yeah. Yeah. So apparently, yeah, I have some alive people come through as well as some that have passed to the other side. It's really, really crazy. And you never know what you're going to get. Like, I can't tell the difference between the two.
That's interesting. So it's really up to the sitter going, oh, that actually sounds like my dad who is in the hospital right now.
Oh, it's definitely investigative work. Like, I'm sitting there, you're talking about spirit not showing up and like how, intimidating that can be. I'm sitting there explaining this live person and they're thinking they're going to be talking to a dead person. Like, they're like, nope, have no idea who you're talking about. Nope, that doesn't describe anybody that I know. And you're like, shit. And then as you get to talking to him a little more, it's like, what does your family member look like that's alive? And this person has dementia. Oh, that is. Oh my gosh. And it nails it every time. It's right every single time. And it just blows my mind. It's so crazy.
What an amazing gift.
It's crazy.
Speaking of gifts, did you know that in the time of the early Mormon pioneers, they would gift human beings to each other?
That is so not right.
It's not, but they did it, and we're going to talk about it. So last week, we teased a little bit that we had been to Pipe Springs National Monument, and we learned some crazy information about human trafficking in the early days of the Mormon pioneers. And we're going to go into that a lot more on today's show.
It's interesting to me, too. So we live in Utah, and it's predominantly Mormons here. And our state is run by a lot of Mormons. And so our state parks and state places that have historical things happening are very turned to a Mormon story.
They're whitewashed, right? Very much.
Yeah, they don't tell all of the truth, but you get to the national level and go to a national park or a national monument, and you get the whole story. So it's so interesting because we're going to touch on that a little bit too with these stories.
Yeah. So Pipe Springs National Monument was set up initially. It was a watering hole where all of the native bands would come and they would water their horses. And
It's like a spring?
Yeah, it's a natural spring. They would camp in the area during different times of year, and they would use it to grow crops and whatnot. Well, the pioneers came in and they said, Psh, this is our water now, bitches.
Which is so not cool because for the Indians, they would share, different tribes would share the same watering holes because they were seen as sacred.
Well, it's the middle of the desert. There's not a lot of water out there, but this was one of those sacred places because it always had water. And if you're traveling through the desert, that's important.
Right. Can you imagine? I'm going to show up to this watering hole and now the pioneers won't let me use it.
Well, and what happened is the pioneers built a big fort and they would fight with Indians who would come there. And eventually what happened is the government came in and said, whoa. We're going to have to share all of this. And so the Indians get a third of it and the Mormons get a third of it and the federal government gets a third of it. It was...
Of course they do. They had to get their cut even though they don't friggin' live here.
Right. But there was a lot of conflict and whatnot that went on before that. But while we were at Pipe Springs, there are the little displays inside the museum portion that talk about this and this and this happened. And one of the things they talked about was the human slave trade, which kind of blew me away because I'd never heard of that happening before with the Mormons. Had you heard of that ever?
I had not, other than Joseph Smith having the black lady that was sealed to him for eternity to be his slave. No. That's the only one that I knew of.
Yeah, same here. So when we got back home, we had to start looking up information on this because I was curious now. And so as I started looking through things, I tried to find, articles and whatnot that were just very objective. I didn't want totally Mormon views. I didn't want totally Gentile views. I wanted the truth. What actually happened?
You wanted history.
Yeah. And I think I found a really good one. And it is actually written by Brian Q. Cannon. And if you're part of the Mormon Society, you'll recognize Cannon as being one of those elite names, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually a building named after George Q. Cannon at BYU.
So
yeah.
Brian Q. Cannon was a professor of history and the director of the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. So he has actually written an article that he went back through different journal accountings from the time. So he had actual journal entries, and then he also was able to get information from descendants of some of these people who had been human trafficked or from the people who had actually done the trafficking. Now, there's some really sensitive things that we're going to read here that are a little disturbing in some of these parts.
Let's put some warnings out.
So, there is some graphic nature involved in this particular episode. Just heads up for you.
It's disturbing.
It is disturbing, but we're going to talk about it anyway because by God, it's interesting.
As I've learned about this, I'm just going to throw this out there. I have become not proud to be white and super not proud to have been Mormon. I'll just say that. Like disgusted because no one should be treated like this. And granted, it happens in other countries of the world. The same thing happens, but this happened right here in our state, right here with our religion.
Well, to be fair, one of the things we learned is that long before the Mormon settlers ever arrived in the Great Basin, the indigenous Native Americans were very heavily involved in trading captured women and children from rival bands to traders of the Rio Grande Valley. So this had been going on for years and years and years. And once they traded them, well, those women and children became slaves or servants of the people in the Rio Grande.
So in Utah had all these indigenous Native Americans, right? They've been here for thousands upon thousands of years, right? But they're different tribes. So these different tribes didn't cohesively always work together.
No, and what we learned is that a lot of times the Ute tribe would be capturing people from the Paiute or the Navajo or the Goshutes and trading those people. And there's some stories about that. A lot of times what I ran into as I was researching this is when you would read through the documents presented by the LDS Church, they would say the Indians would hurt and torture these captives, so the Mormons would purchase them from the natives to end their suffering so that they could have a good home.
Bullshit.
Oh, Nan's bullshit meter went off. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
I don't buy that. I think that's part of a story.
I think it is as well, and I'll explain why I think that. So early Mormon pioneers very often would send out punitive war bands to go and fight with natives, and they actually even called them that.
War bands?
No, punitive actions.
Really?
Punitive action. Basically, oh, they stole a cow, we're going to go out and we're going to kill 10 of them and take cows back.
Are you serious? That's so petty.
Well, at the time, a cow's a big deal. You can't
but
just go
most
and
of
steal a
them
cow.
Most of them were starving.
Well, and most of them were starving because of why?
Because the pioneers came in and took their resources.
Yeah, they took all the best land with the water.
They couldn't share. They had to have it all for themselves. So, like I said, I'm not happy about my race.
I think what you need to remember, though, is it's all the human race. And it wasn't just the whites doing this. The natives traded the slaves as well. So let's get into this a little deeper and share some of these stories.
I was just going to say, but the natives didn't take up all the resources so that they would starve out people.
That is fair.
And that's not cool. That's what I have an issue with.
Okay. So you don't have an issue with them slave trading?
I do, but dude, how douchey is it to show up to a new land where there's already people inhabited, and then they're just like, oh yeah, we're just going to take this whole well for ourselves and all of this land, and oh, you're shit out of luck. Like, that's just like, why can't they just move in and be a nice next door neighbor and make banana bread? Like
you do?
Yeah.
Not everyone makes good banana bread. Maybe they didn't have access to bananas because they're not something you can grow here.
I'm just saying, they could make a loaf of bread, or they could do something, trade with them, like be a nice person, but
yeah,
like Christ-like. Oh, wait.
Well, let's go into this article a little bit. I want to share some of the stories that came out on this.
We haven't even gotten started yet. No, I'm already bitching.
And you're already on banana bread. It's not always about banana bread, Nan, or cookies.
I have a special place in my heart for the indigenous Native Americans, though. I love them.
Yeah. So. Well, and we talked a little bit, your spirit guides. You've got some natives on your spirit guide team, right?
I have a big one, yeah. I have a big Indian chief that's one of my main spirit guides. So, yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So when the Mormons arrived in the valley, indigenous traders approached them as new potential partners in the slave trade, right? Because hey, we've been trading with these folks from New Mexico. You guys are here now. We can trade with you.
Right.
And this happened just a few weeks after they got into the valley. The natives were arriving and trying to sell some of their captives. And they were being helped by a fur trader, a mountain man named Barney Ward, who had been in the area for some time. Now, we've got a journal entry from one of Brigham Young's nephews, a man named John R. Young. And he recalled, soon after we moved onto our city lot in the fall of 1847, a band of Indians camped near us. Early one morning, we were excited at hearing their shrill, blood-curdling war whoop mingled with occasional sharp cries of pain. Father sent me to the fort for help. Charles Decker and Barney Ward, the interpreter, and others hurried to the camp. It was Wanship's band, so Wanship was one of the Indian chiefs. And some of his braves had just returned from the warpath in fighting with Little Wolf's band. They lost 2 men, but had succeeded in taking 2 girls prisoner. One of these they had killed, and were torturing the other. To save her life, Charlie Decker bought her and took her to our house to be washed and clothed.
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, so...
that they would save her like that, because they were going to kill her.
Well, they were probably going to kill her. But let me ask you this. By purchasing the slaves, do you think that emboldened the natives to say, hey, we're going to kill this person if you don't buy him? You better hurry and buy him.
Well, it makes it, supply and demand.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So they're going to go and get more rather than they shouldn't have purchased her. They should have just taken her in.
So the interesting thing that happened here,
or maybe even killed the Indians. You know what I mean? That were trying to kill her.
that's definitely something they could have done and said, hey, this isn't appropriate. We're not going to deal with this.
Yeah, you don't get to treat people like that. Bye-bye. And then take her in and help her. But I know that when they purchase them, they're indentured.
Well, and that was something that came a little bit later, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
So the craziest thing here is by purchasing the girl, Decker essentially became complicit in human trafficking, right? But you can't fault him because you go, wow, yeah, he saved her life. That was the means he had at that time to do so. And given the alternative, like you said, the girl probably would have died. Now, Mormons continued to buy Indian children for quite a bit longer with the encouragement from Brigham Young. Now, what would happen is he encouraged the saints to purchase these Indians and would arrest any traders from New Mexico who attempted to purchase captives.
Okay, wait. So the people from New Mexico that came up obviously weren't Mormons then?
Correct.
And so he didn't want them getting the Indian children. So it was only safe for the Mormon people here in Utah.
Correct. So he would arrest the people from New Mexico, but encouraged the Mormons. In fact, in May of 1851, Brigham Young advised the saints of Parowan to, and here's the quote, buy up the Lamanite children as fast as they could and educate them and teach them the gospel. And that's 173 years ago. That's not that long ago.
That isn't that long ago.
So buy up the Lamanite children as fast as they could.
As if they don't already worship a god. Wow. Okay.
A year after that, so that was 1851. In 1852, a territorial justice named Zerubbabel Snow reported that many of the inhabitants of this territory have purchased, for a trifling sum, children, all of whom, so far I can learn, taken into families of those who have purchased them as their own children. So they would purchase these children, take them into their homes as their own children. Now, there is some discussion there. So the descendants of those who did the purchasing said, oh, they were brought into the homes and treated as their own family and their own children and loved as a son or a daughter or a sibling.
Two sides to every story.
The other side of the story, yes. So the descendants of those who were captured said, no, we learned all of our lives that they were treated as servants. They did the hard work. They did the manual labor. They did the hard things that no one else wanted to. And they weren't entitled to any of the inheritance either. So one of the things that was a telltale sign if someone was taken in truly as a member of the family was they were left with inheritance.
Okay, I could see that. That would be cool. But yeah, when you become of age, they're just going to kick them out. They can't go back to their band of Indians, right? They can't go back to their tribe.
Yeah, they're pretty much
pretty
on
white,
their own.
right?
Let's talk about this next part though. So this really is going to address what you're talking about now. In 1852, the territorial legislature passed a law for the purchase of the indigenous captives. So acknowledging that the Utes relied on the trade for horses and manufactured goods, and that the purchased captives made very likely proselytes. So they said, hey, look, the Utes rely on this slave trade. We can't put them out of business. And if we purchase these kids, well, we can convert them to God. The Indians consider it an allowable traffic, is what the preamble stated. Unsold children were, quote, generally doomed to the most miserable existence, suffering the torture of every species of cruelty until death kindly relieves them and closes the revolting scenery. So essentially, they said, look, if we don't do this, these children and women are going to just be killed.
My heart hurts.
Yeah.
That's sad.
They continued to say, all humane and Christian people should extend unto this degraded and downtrodden race such relief as can be awarded to them. The law set the maximum servitude at 20 years.
Servitude.
Yep. So rather than calling it slavery, because remember, this is the same time period where we're just dealing with all the slavery on the other side of the country, right? And
tri-trade.
just they could still have indentured servitude. So the indentured servitude was interesting. With an indenture, they would enter into a contract, right? So you and I, if you're going to be my indentured servant, we would enter into a contract for a certain number of years, and you would have things that you had to adhere to, and I would have things that I would have to adhere to. And then at the end of that time frame, you could go on your merry way. Think about this, though. With any contract, everyone should be able to understand it and have equal say in the parts of the contract, right?
Right.
Well, a lot of these contracts were entered into with children who
Babies.
spoke a different language, who didn't understand anything about the contract. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well. I can see, you're fuming over there. I can see it. Nan's face is like red. She's holding back the swear words.
I don't like this. I don't like it at all. It's not okay.
Well, here's something interesting too. So in Utah, the maximum servitude was set at 20 years. In New Mexico, it was 10 years. So they set it for twice as long as they did in New Mexico.
That's incredible. Can you, your whole life would be serving in this little tiny family, right?
Yeah.
And then
good
all of a
portion
sudden
it.
you get kicked out, and where do you go? What do you do? Like,
Right. Well, and that's what would happen is the natives didn't accept them after that, and the
whites don't accept
didn't
them.
accept them either.
No.
And it caused a lot of problems. And people who did end up staying in those communities oftentimes lived out on their own, as hermits, and they never married. They never, had any life beyond that. They were just kind of loners and did their own
so
thing.
sad.
The law that they wrote did require some things to happen, though. It says that any person who acquired any Indian prisoner, child or woman, whether by purchase or otherwise, had to file an indenture agreement with county officials. So a lot of these indenture agreements are where some of the research for this and other articles came from. So for the research, they utilized those records, and there were around 450 of those indenture agreements they were able to find.
450? Wow.
Yeah, and that's just the ones that were entered into the agreements, right? But in the agreements, owners of captives, and it didn't say families of captives, it said owners of captives, between the ages of 7 and 16 were to clothe them in comfortable and becoming manner. Brigham Young actually applauded the law. Would you like to hear what he said about it?
Barely.
You barely want to hear. You want to hear.
I don't like Brigham Young.
So let's hear it. Brigham Young said that this may be said to present a new feature in the traffic of human beings. It is essentially purchasing them into freedom instead of slavery.
Wow. That's a gaslight.
Is it a gaslight? Tell me why you think that's a gaslight.
Really? Like,
Yeah, I'm going to take Brigham Young's stance on this and say, no, we're saving them.
but you're not.
They could be into slavery, but we're going to buy them into freedom.
But they're still slaves for the family that buys them. And then they have to, I'm sure that the women have to have babies with the owner.
There were actually several illegitimate children,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's obviously. And that then you have the children that have to do all of the work and stuff. They spend all their life when they should be being children. They don't get to be children. And then, when you reach a certain age, say it's 20 or it's 23 or whatever, you get kicked out with just a dress, right? Or 2 outfits. And then where are you supposed to go? You have no home. You have no tribe. You have nowhere to go. That is not a favor. You
Yeah.
know, that is not a service. That is that's taking someone's life away, and that's not okay.
It's indentured servitude. And actually, between the passage of the law in the early 1880s, Mormons took hundreds of Paiute, Goshute, Shoshone, Navajo, and Ute children into their homes.
I'm just going to say, it's no wonder the Native Americans don't like the whites.
Yeah.
I don't blame them.
Well, and the sad thing is that the law neither banned Indian slavery nor the traffic of Indian slaves, right?
But why?
Yeah.
Why did no one stand up for them?
Well, I think in their way, they thought, well, how can we get the most out of this situation? And
Because they're selfish.
and
yes,
try and do
greedy.
some good. So they did a little bit of good, and in their minds, I think they believed they were doing right by them because they were bringing them to God. They were bringing them Mormonism and showing them the way to God.
Here's the thing that blows my mind, though. We have some Native American friends that we love, right? And I'm talking about the Indian chief that we know really well. And I have never met more spiritual people. Like, if they even got to know the tribe or the people, they'd understand that they have more spiritualism and are closer to God than anybody can claim to be in any religion. They didn't even get to know them or give them a chance. Like, where's the banana bread?
Right? Where's the banana bread? That's going to be the title of this episode. I think that's a really difficult thing to do, right? Because a lot of times when you're in religion, you see spirituality as religion. And if you don't worship in a certain manner, then you're not seen as having that spirituality, right?
But all they need to do is see people as people, you know? I mean, it blows my mind. I just don't get it. I don't think this way. Sorry.
Yeah.
And you can see my body language, like my legs are crossed, my arms are crossed. I hate this subject.
She's uncomfortable. She's angry.
I'm very protective. I don't like driving through Indian reservations. I know that they're given land, but their houses are never beautiful. I think that the indigenous Native Americans should be given back their land, and they should be being paid for us being here. I think that would be fair. And maybe it's because I lived other lives as an Indian. Maybe it's because my spirit guide is a giant chief. Like, I don't know, but I feel so strongly about that. And I have full body chills right now. And I do that. I mean, you can vouch for me. Every time we drive through a res, I'm like, this isn't right. It doesn't feel right. Like, they need to be set up for life. We took their land. We took their families. We took.
Yeah.
It's not okay. And the stories you're going to read are just going to blow my mind. So I'll be quiet. Keep going.
No, you don't have to be quiet at all. I'm just letting you ride the roller coaster.
Thanks, babe. This is great. My hands are in the air.
Yep, hands in the air right now. So there was a man named C.A.W., its initials, Bowman. He was a New Yorker who had settled in New Mexico. Now, he actually came into the San Pete Valley and attempted to exchange guns and ammunition for children with the Utes. Now, the Utes, they say, became excited because they're like, oh, hell yeah, guns and ammunition. This is good for us, right? Because, you know,
the Utes and the Navajo would fight.
The repeating rifle was the great equalizer.
Yeah,
we all know that.
Right.
So they're excited to get guns and ammunition. Well, Brigham Young and the Mormon authorities actually prevented them from trading with the New Mexicans. And the Utes were upset about it. They were like, why would you do this? Because the Mormons paid them less than the people from New Mexico did.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they undercut them.
Yep. Yep.
Of
Not
course.
only did they undercut them, but they made it illegal for them to operate in the area. So they said, yeah, you guys don't get to come here. So they essentially created a monopoly on the slave trade.
I'm just wondering what would happen if the Utes were like, I think not. I'm not listening to you. F off. Like, we're just going to do what we want to do. You can't run the whole state, right?
Yeah. Well, they would have had some serious wars with the Native Americans. And they already did. There were already several that happened.
There's lots of wars here in Utah that happened. Lots of massacres that we don't talk about.
Yeah, there definitely were, and there were some, right close to where we grew up that you never really heard much about, but there were.
Yeah, Spanish Fork Canyon.
Yeah, the Black Hawk Indian War is a big one you hear about, and there are actually headstones in the Spanish Fork Cemetery that will name people veterans of the Black Hawk Indian War, which was really more of a massacre.
I was going to say it wasn't really a war, was it?
So let's talk about some of these indentured agreements. So like we talked about, the indentures were drafted as agreements between the captive and the purchaser. For all intents and purposes, it was really just legal fiction, right? Because you have these non-English speaking small children who are entering into the agreements. One such agreement that the article quotes is one in 1853. Richard Benson of Parowan. That's not that long ago, right?
No.
So Richard Benson filed an indenture indicating that 3-year-old Sarah Benson, and here's the quote on the indenture, voluntarily bound herself to live and serve the said R. Benson until she shall have attained the age of 15. She also agrees and binds herself to obey all the lawful commands and counsel of said R. Benson, and to conduct herself at all times and in all respects as should become a child to its parent or lawful guardian. In return, Richard Benson agreed to teach or cause the said Sarah to be taught some useful trade or avocation, and to correct and teach her to observe the principles of good order and industry, and also to send her to a good school for the term of 27 months between the ages of 7 and 16 years, and to clothe her in comfortable and becoming manner. Benson pledged to treat Sarah as a parent or guardian should to his child or ward, except in the relation of inheritance. Benson agreed to provide 1 good suit of clothes for holidays and 1 good suit for working when Sarah was released on her 15th birthday.
Wow.
So
wow.
This girl was 3 years old.
3 years old and scared to death, wanting her mom.
Yeah. Can you imagine a little 3-year-old? I mean, that's a year younger than our grandson.
Our little grandson. Yeah.
And think about how much he loves his parents and how close he is to them, and having someone take him away from them and say, yeah, this is your new mom and dad, and you're going to do whatever they say.
And then making him do that.
And
right?
then him not even understanding the language.
You know, while you were reading that, I was having little flashbacks to the pictures of the boarding schools of all the Indian children.
Yeah.
And how they had, Indians would grow their hair out, and it was a sign of spirituality for them. And the first thing the whites would do is chop their hair right off and give them these little nubby bangs and chop their hair clear up towards their ears.
Well, a lot of times they would shave it all the way off because they'd say that they had lice and insect infestations.
But can you imagine being 3 years old and having not only staying with a family like that, but having all your hair chopped off and everything that you know of being taken from you and just being in a strange place? That'd be terrifying.
Completely changed, right? Well, and a lot of these children came into households under a variety of circumstances, right? Most were purchased from warriors and raiders and paid for with livestock or food or weapons, blankets, saddles, clothing, and usually items that were valued between $25 and $100.
Wow.
Yep. For the price of a human life, $25 to $100.
That makes me sick.
For 20 years of labor.
20 years of labor.
So Jacob Hamblin is known as
a really good dude here in St. George.
Yes. He was one of the first settlers in southern Utah.
Yes.
And he's said to have created amazing relationships with the Native Americans in the area and done all of this good for the area. Now, what they don't talk about is how he was involved in the Mountain Meadows Massacre and how he was involved in other items like this child slave trade.
The interesting thing is when we went to Pipe Springs, there is a picture of Jacob Hamblin. And before we read about him, we zoomed in on his eyes and we were like, nope, he's not a good person. Like you can see it in his eyes.
Do you know what?
And then we read about it.
Yeah, a lot of those early settlers, they had those, I'll fucking kill you eyes is what they had.
Yeah.
And they kind of had to, right? They went through a lot of bullshit to get here. So most of them had that for reasons of living a very difficult life where it was a necessity. So were they good people? I think they had potential to be good people. Were they bad people? I think they had potential to be bad people. Nan's biting her lip over there. Let it out. Let it out.
I think he's a douche canoe. That's what I think. The end. I just do. Like, seriously, even being involved with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which I didn't even know existed till we moved down here 5 years ago. Oh my gosh. And then taking the children that were left over after they killed the men, the women, and the children. They took the younger children and he took them in and then farmed them out to other Mormon families where the militia came and actually took the children back and took them back to their families.
The U.S. Army did.
Yeah, the U.S. Army from Arkansas. But it literally took soldiers to come and get these kids and take them back to their families.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to talk about some of the prices that were paid for some of these children. So Jacob Hamblin bought a 6-year-old boy for a gun and a blanket and some ammunition.
Why would you want a 6-year-old boy?
Well, because he's got a lot of work life ahead of him.
But 6 years old, they don't do a lot of work.
No, that's true. Not a lot they can do.
They just fiddle around until they're maybe 10, and then they start to do stuff. If you make them. Like, why a 6-year-old boy? That gives me the heebie-jeebies, I'm saying.
Yeah, I get you. Oh, I see where you're going. Yeah, it doesn't say any more about it. It does say in 1859, John D. Lee traded a young horse for an Indian girl of 8 years of age. Mormons acquired children who were prisoners following skirmishes with Indians. For instance, in 1852, 2 Paiutes absconded with Sixtus Johnson's ox. He and a small party pursued the thieves and found the butchered remains of the animal 16 miles later. In another 4 miles, they surprised 2 elderly men, a 12-year-old boy, and a 5-year-old lad drying the meat. They took the 4 hostage, but 3 escaped. Johnson brought the remaining 5-year-old to town and gave him to his father, Joel. So, hey, you know what? They killed your ox, but here's this kid. You can have him instead.
But it sounded like it was a little family that was hungry and they were drying the meat.
2 elderly men, a 12-year-old and a 5-year-old.
2 kids.
Yeah.
Like they were hungry. Oh.
Well, and it makes you wonder, okay, wait a minute. How did 2 old men and a 12-year-old escape? But the 5-year-old they didn't bother to take with them? That seems weird, right?
That does seem weird because you would probably grab the 5-year-old, right?
To me, it feels more like we killed those old ones and the 12-year-old because he was old enough to cause us problems. But the 5-year-old, we can bring him back.
Bring him back and he won't say a word.
And we can assimilate him into our culture.
Yep. Yeah,
just like they did.
That feels right.
Well, that's what they did with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, right?
It is.
They took all the very, very young children because they could assimilate them.
Well, and they're too little to repeat anything that happened. And then as they get older, they forget.
Yeah. In 1850, a man named George Montgomery, who passed through Salt Lake on his way to California, reported that there are now held in slavery by the Mormons about 30 Utah women and girls who were taken prisoners of war of extermination waged last winter by the Mormons against 2 small bands of that tribe. So that was one of the circumstances of the massacres. So a war of extermination, but they kept about 30 of the women and girls.
And why women and girls? Why would they do that?
Why do you think, Nan?
Right?
Yeah.
Just going to breed the Indian right out of them.
So if you want to get into some of the early Mormon doctrine, and I was always taught as well. Like when I say I grew up Mormon, obviously. I'm still Mormon, actually.
But you never grew up.
Yeah, I never grew up. Nan and I are in a mixed faith relationship right now. Sometimes it's difficult. Because she is not a Mormon.
Not anymore.
But we were always taught that the dark skin was the mark of Cain, right? So anyone with dark skin descended directly from Cain, which is Cain and Abel, so Cain the first murderer, and they were responsible for that. Now, Mormon doctrine would say that darkness would change. And I know, Nan, you were just looking up some information about how the Mormons worded that.
There are 2 scriptures that relate to this subject. So if you go to 2 Nephi 36.
And that's out of the Book of Mormon.
In the Book of Mormon. So Joseph Smith wrote this, right? Their scales of darkness shall begin to fall from their eyes, and many generations shall not pass away among them, save that they shall be white and a delightsome people. And they're talking about the dark-skinned Lamanites or the Indians. Yeah,
and that's even when we refer back to the topic we were on with the slavery, they talked about the Lamanites, right? Instead of calling them Native Americans, Brigham Young called them buy up the Lamanite children.
Exactly. So in 1981, the LDS Church decided to change the most correct book on earth, right? They decided to change it.
Is there sarcasm there? I don't know if I detected a little bit of sarcasm or not.
You can't change the words of the prophet, but it's a Latter-day Prophet, so of course
Well, the older prophets don't matter anymore. It's only the current prophet who speaks for the... Yeah.
So they went into that scripture and they changed white and replaced it with pure. But even today, if you go to 2 Nephi 5:21, it still says, and he had caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. For behold, my blood's just boiling right now. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, and they had become like unto flint. Wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them.
Oh,
Rude.
yeah. So that is the Mormon take on melanin.
On melanin, yeah.
Interesting. So,
So if they were converted to the Lord, their skin color would change.
yes.
And basically what they were going to do is they were going to breed the Indian out of them so that future generations wouldn't have that color of skin, is really what they were going to do. But they're saying, yeah, if you become a Mormon, your skin color will change. And actually, I'm just going to be really, really truthful right here. I think that Native American skin is so beautiful. It's so beautiful, so golden and so gorgeous. And they don't have the age spots that I have. I'm just saying I would trade them any day.
Right? So that was 1850 when George Montgomery talked about the War of Extermination. In 1856, Lorenzo Brown wrote that a militia company returned to Salt Lake after a 2-week punitive campaign against the Utes, bringing a number of squaws and children prisoners who were distributed amongst the citizens here.
I just read something.
Uh-oh.
Holy balls. I do not like Brigham Young. I'm just going to say.
What did you read?
So the second LDS president, Brigham Young, stated in 1859 that Lamanite skin color was related to transgression. Quote, "You may inquire of the intelligent of the world whether they can tell why the aborigines of this country are dark, loathsome, ignorant, and sunken into a depths of degradation. When the Lord has a people, he makes covenants with them and gives unto them promises. Then, if they transgress his law, change his ordinances, and break his covenants he has made with them, he will put a mark upon them, as in the case of the Lamanites and other portions of the house of Israel. But by and by, they will become a white and delightsome people." Okay, keep going.
So Brigham Young promised that, hey, they'll become white and delightsome. And it sounds like he was just pushing forth his plan by having the saints buy up the Lamanite children.
But he literally says that the reason why their skin is that color is because they're loathsome, ignorant, and sunken into the depths of degradation. What?
Yeah, that's pretty harsh.
Has nothing to do with the region you're born into at all, does it? Oh.
Yep. Ignorance of the 1800s.
Brigham Young wasn't ignorant. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So remember how we were talking about children
Yes.
who were captured from
Yes.
massacres?
Keep going.
You want to hear another one?
Not really, but keep going. It makes me sick.
Yeah. There's another one. A Dave Monson was one of 3 survivors of the Circleville Massacre, where Mormon guards slaughtered a Paiute band during the Black Hawk War. Monson's granddaughter, Vicky Mae Supera, described Monson's capture. A day following the killings, they found 2 Indian boys and a girl hiding in a nearby cave. They pulled out the first Indian and found she was a female about 12 or 13. Kill her for sure. No one wants an Indian squaw. That's a quote from Dave Monson's journal. It doesn't say who said that. She was Indian Dave's big sister. They picked her up by her heels, her head striking the wooden wagon wheel, and were throwing her around like a rag doll, her head striking the wooden wheel repeatedly until they killed her. By this time, Indian Dave's younger brother, who was about 4, was hysterical and wouldn't stop crying. So they tied the little Paiute boy to the wagon wheel and rode on to Spring City. There, Captain James Tillman Allred spoke to a Swede family, the Peter Monson and his wife, and he asked if they were interested in taking the boy, or otherwise he would just kill him, and that he would trade the boy for a fresh horse and a bushel of wheat. Monson agreed to the payment, and the family took the boy and raised him as their own.
Can you imagine the trauma that little boy has? He sees his sister killed right before his eyes, and then he has to ride a wagon wheel in the dirt like he's a piece of meat. And then he gets given to a white family. Can you imagine? He probably was never even ever normal or even had a chance.
Well,
that breaks my heart.
Yeah. And that little boy was this Dave Monson.
Ugh.
So Another descendant said that Dave would see that Captain Allred, the man who brought him to Spring City, all the time. He would see him. He later would tell his children who the man was, so that the memory of that horrible act
was staying alive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just despicable.
I would have gone psycho. I would have totally killed him. I'm sorry. I just would have. I would have gone psycho. I wouldn't have lived like that. There's no way. He must have been a very, very kind-hearted boy.
Right?
Yeah.
So Dave Monson went through literal horror and then was a slave after remembering how his family was all massacred in that Black Hawk War.
That's heartbreaking. I don't know how you could even cope.
Right. It's, I guess, you just one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. But, it's really horrible to hear that those things happened right where we grew up. I mean, that was literally just, not too many miles from where we grew up. It's,
but don't talk about it. Let's not have it be a subject ever.
Yeah. I've never, ever heard of any of this until we started researching, what had happened with the Mormon slave trade. I mean, we had heard about the Black Hawk War, but you never heard about extermination parties and things like that. And you never heard about them taking the women and children captive. It's heartbreaking to realize that is the heritage of the LDS Church.
And as we continue on our next episode about this, you actually have a picture of one of the extermination parties that you showed me. And it's just one of many that were sent down by Brigham Young. So really, really interesting. More information than we can do in just one episode. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to cut it a little short.
Well, and I've got a shitload of Instagram reels I've got to view. Nan has this habit of sending hundreds of Instagram reels to me. And then she's like, did you see that one? Did you see that one? Did you see that? No, I didn't yet. When?
That is such a squirrel moment. They're all about vacations because I want a vacation.
She wants a vacation. Oh, Lord. Yeah, and if you follow her on social media, you'll see all the vacation posts. So we're going to have to end today's show. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate the support and all of the comments that we get and all of the reviews. If you love the show or you haven't left a review, please do so. It really helps us.
And thank you for supporting us and helping us grow, you guys. If you have any questions or any suggestions that you'd like to have on the show, please reach out to us at info@themormonmediumpodcast.com, and we'll see you
on the other side of the veil.